Hello there all my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this Willow Wirework Bracelet, where because of the technique we're using we have negative space within it, which is quite different and unusual. Now if you like the particular bracelets that I've made for this tutorial, they will be available for sale in my shop. You can find them in the description box down below, and like always you can support me by liking, sharing and subscribing. And there's also a super thanks button below the video if you want to support me that way so I can continue making these tutorials for you. Otherwise, if you want to learn how to make these bracelets, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. Now I'm using a regular round silver coated copper wire, except for this gauge here, which is a 1mm. For that I'm just using a copper wire because it doesn't matter what wire you use for that, as we're just using it in the process of making the bracelet but not for the final piece. Now for the base wire we're actually going to be using for the final piece, I'm using a 0.8mm. And for the weaving wire I'm using a 0.6mm. Now that is quite thick for a weaving wire, so I do recommend that you use a soft wire for this, as that will make it far easier to work with. As for the beads, we need some 4mm rounds, and the specific ones I'm using are faceted purple banded agate gemstones. Of course you can use whatever you prefer. And of course we need a findings as well, so I'm using a lobster claw clasp, an extended chain and a few jump rings to put it all together. As for the tools, we'll need some flush cutters so we can cut our wire, chain nose and tweezer nose pliers to manipulate the wire with, and also for the jump rings. And finally some 6-step bell making pliers for any loops we need to make. Of course you can also use round nose pliers for this. So like usual, you can check out the description box below the video for the material list and useful links. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. So we then need to cut some lengths of our wires, and first of all I have 6 lengths of our 1mm of about 25 centimeters each, and these will be the base wires that we're going to be weaving around, and also just make sure they're nice and straight so we don't have any kinks in them. As for the 0.8mm here, we're going to need 2 lengths of about 30 centimeters each, and these will also be base wires but after we've woven our piece. Now the 0.6mm wire here I'm going to leave attached to the reel because it's hard to know exactly how much we're going to need, and also that way we'll have minimum wastage. So to start out with, we need to grab our temporary base wires here, and then also our weaving wire that's still attached to the reel. And I'm just going to take one base wire at a time, because first of all we need to attach the weaving wire here. So I'm just going to start towards one end of the base wire and then also one end of the weaving wire, and just leave a short little tail that we can hold on to. Then we want to attach it by wrapping it around, and I'm just going to do that twice. So like that. Then I'm going to bring in a new base wire, place that above the previous one. Then I'm going to take the weaving wire here over the top of both of the base wires, and make sure that your wraps are nice and close next to each other. And it's then coming down behind. What I'm then going to do is bring it up between the 2 base wires that we just went over the top of, and just use that to then also help push your wraps closer together. I'm going to bring in the next base wire, place that as the new top one, and then go over the top of the next top 2 here, come up between those 2 that we just wrapped over the top of from the back, and again push down with your fingers, place a new base wire. So as you can see, we're working our way from the bottom up towards the top, and we're gradually adding in a new base wire at a time. Wrap over the top of the new top 2 base wires, come up between them, push down, and then we have 2 left in this case. Place your next base wire, go over the top of them, come up between them, push down, and then we have our final one left. So place that as the now permanent top one, go over the top of them, come up between the 2 just like the other times. And now first of all we have all the base wires attached here, so we don't need to worry about adding any more in. But just to finish off this kind of graduation upwards, I'm just going to then wrap around the top one by itself. Just a single wrap like that. And then now that we're at the top, we need to start working our way back down again. So that means we need to step down 1 base wire every time. Of course, like I said, they're already attached, so we don't need to worry about that. So all that means is I'm going to then come up between the base wires that's in the right position to where I then need to wrap over the next 2 base wires. So in this case I need to wrap over the top 2 base wires because it's going to be equivalent to the one we did on the other side of the single wrap. So it means I need to come up between the 2nd and 3rd top one to then be able to wrap that over the top 2, and just make sure your wraps are nice and tight. Along the way you can also use pliers to help ensure that your wraps are nice and tight, so just push them together if you need to. Now come down behind, and I'm going to step down 1 base wire now, so I'm going to come up between the 2 below the previous place like that, and then wrap over the top of the 2 top ones above that, so I'm leaving out the very top one in this case. And again, if you need to, you can help push that tight. Step down another base wire as we come up from the back. Now go over the top of the next two base wires, come down between to come down behind them again. Just push those nice and tight, working our way all the way down towards the bottom, continuing to just step down one base wire at a time, but always wrapping over the top of two base wires at a time, except for when we've reached the outer one and just doing that single wrap, which we are going to do after we've done this one. So just do that wrap over both bottom base wires there. So we've reached the bottom now, and that's when I need to do that single wrap around the bottom one by itself. Just push that tight. Another reason to use pliers as well is because this is obviously a thicker weaving wire than you would normally use, so it's a little bit tougher to just use your hands with that. But then from here we just need to basically move away from the bottom and back up again. So I'm just gonna go over the top of the bottom two base wires, come up between those two, and now just step up one base wire at a time, working our way back up towards the top. And this is basically going to be the pattern that we're going to keep doing. So we're just going to be going from bottom to the top, top to the bottom, and working our way zigzagging like this all the way along for the length that we need. So now weave my full length here, and the length you want to weave this is a bit longer than you want the final bracelet to be. That's just my personal preference. That way you have a bit of leeway when adding the beads in, and rather have too much weave than too little, of course. Now because we're done weaving, what I'm going to do is just cut off the weaving wire from the reel, just so we're not kind of stuck and attached to that, and then just put that out of the way. And then from here we need to start removing some of our base wires. So I'm just going to grab some chain nose pliers. I personally prefer to use those because you can get a much better grip on the wires here than just using your fingers. It will tend to kind of slip a bit more if you're just using your fingers there. But what I'm going to do is start from one side and work my way across one wire at a time. Now it doesn't matter what side you start from, but I'm going to just take the first wire here, and then what I want to do is hold on to the weave, and you just want to kind of hold on to it up on this end, and then just pull this length of wire through and out of the weave. So you can see it is now removed, and I basically want to do that with each one except for the very final one on the other side. So just take one wire at a time and remove that. So now I removed all but one of the base wires here, and make sure it's an outer one. I just personally like to do that just to help keep more control of the piece while we're then adding the beads in, which is then the next thing that we're going to do. So I'm going to start on one end, and we're going to add the beads on the end that doesn't have a base wire through it. Now this is also where we need to bring in one of our other base wires. So this is the 0.8mm that we cut ready. And basically what we need to do is start feeding this through the outer wraps there all the way along, but in between we need to add our beads in. So just make sure I have some of them handy. So I'm going to feed this length of wire through the very first set of wraps here, and then to add our bead in, we need to then feed this new base wire through the hole in the bead, but then also feed it straight through the next set of wraps there. So the bead is going to get trapped right in between these little sections of wraps, and then we basically want to be doing this all the way along to the other end. Now there's a couple of ways you can add your beads in, and it's personal preference, and obviously you can find your own rhythm as well. One way is to just have your base wire poking out just ever so slightly, and then find the hole in the bead and then put that down into the gap between the weed sections. So basically put it into position and then just catch the hole with the wire, feed it through, and then catch onto the next weed section as well. And then next you can just again leave the wire just sticking out ever so slightly. And also don't worry about how the weave looks at the moment. You can see some of them are quite tight and some of them are quite open. That's what the beads are for as well. It's going to help create a consistent spacing between them. But that was one way you could add your bead. Another way is feeding the wire through further and then just have it come out on the side there. Then take your bead, add it onto the length of wire, and then just push it down to where that gap in the weave is. And then pull the base wire back just enough so we can just slide it in and catch on to that next set of wraps, and then it comes out ready for the next bead. So there's just a couple of ways where you can add the beads. Whatever you find most comfortable and easiest is completely up to you, but then just keep going like this. Open your weave whenever you need to, add your bead, feed the base wire through, and then continue all the way down to the other end. So I now added all the beads I need for the length I want the bracelet to be. So you can see we then have this excess of the weave, but that's fine. We can just get rid of that. We don't need to weave the exact length that we need. So what I'm going to do is go in and cut off the excess of the weave here. And you just want to cut it kind of in the middle of a weaved section. So we just have a little bit left on the bottom there. And then just remove this excess weaved wire. And then what we just want to do is get the base wire that we've been adding the beads with further through, so we have a decent length on both ends here. And we're not going to risk it's going to pull out. So just push that further through until I have something a bit like this. So you can see I have a decent length still there. But now we also have a decent length on the other end. Now that we have the beads and one base wire added on this side of the weave where we had it open before, we can now go in and remove the remaining base wire that we originally used to make the weave with. So make sure to keep hold of everything here and then just start gently pulling this base wire out of the weave, because then obviously what we need to do is repeat what we just did on this other side as well. But in order to do that, we just need to remove this temporary base wire first of all, so like that. And what we can then just do is make sure that the beads and the base wire that we've just added here is sitting all nice and tight together, so you can always just help push them close. You can also keep hold of either end of the base wire there and then just push the weaves and the beads close together there. But then for now, this is what we have, and it is a little bit wobbly to deal with, but it's going to get better once we add our base wire and beads in on the other side as well, which is what we're going to do next. And we're literally going to do that in the exact same way as I showed you before. So first of all, get the other length of base wire, the 0.8mm out, and then we just need to start from one end, start feeding that through, and then along the way we add one bead in at a time and slot it in between those weaved sections. Bring the base wire through the next section there until we reach the gap, and we can then add the next bead, slot that in, and then keep feeding it through like this all the way to the other end. So I now got the base wires and beads on both sides here all the way along, and we also have the ends coming out, so we have something to work with to finish off the bracelet. Now what we just want to do is finish off the ends of the weaving wire. So on this end is where we cut it off, and we have just a little bit left of a weaved section. What I'm going to do is undo that section, so just kind of reverse the weaving, you could say, bring it in the opposite direction, just so we basically then get a little short length of our wire. Because what I'm then going to do is just take this and then wrap it around an extra time, because we do have a single wrap on there already, but I just want to do that again, so we have more than just one single wrap. So something like that, and then we can go in and cut off the excess. Cut that off, get rid of it, and then just make sure to squeeze down the end. And on the other end we have the initial tail that we left in the beginning. Just going to do the same with that. Just make sure we have a couple of single wraps there, then go in and cut off the excess, get rid of that, and then just squeeze down the end. So now we've gotten rid of the weaving wire here. And then what we need to do is start finishing off the ends with the base wires, and also finish off the ends of the bracelet, so we can obviously attach a clasp or even make the clasp with these wires here. That's up to you. So I'm just going to do one end at a time, and what we need to do is just have another bead handy, because I want to add that to basically fill in this little gap on the one side that's opposite to where we just finished off the weaving wire. So it's going to kind of make it more level now. And then I'm going to take my tweezer nose, and we need to then bend these wires in more towards each other, and just make sure the beads are pushed down close together there, so it's nice and tight. And these wires are going to end up crossing right there in the middle. And then I'm going to take one of them where they're crossing over and bend that straight out from the end of the bracelet there. And then I'm just going to take my piece and hold onto the ends of the wires here with my pliers so they don't move, while I'm then taking the other length here and wrapping this around that base wire that we just bent out from the end, just a couple of times like that. So again, that's nice and secure. We can then go in, cut off the excess, and then just make sure to squeeze down the end of the wire. Now what I'm going to do is just make a wrap loop on either end that we can then attach a separate clasp to. So to do that, we then need to just use the remaining length of wire here, and I'm going to place my pliers just a little bit above that wrap that we just made, and then bend the wire to the side at about a 90-degree angle like that. Then I'm taking my 6-step bell making pliers to make a loop with, you can use your round nose pliers and bring that back around so we get a full circle like that. Grab onto that with your pliers so we can then wrap the remaining wire here around just below where that loop is and just filling in that little gap. And again, we can cut off the excess, get rid of that, and just squeeze down the end. And then here we have our wrap loop where we can then just attach whatever kind of finding that we want to. Now of course we just want to flip this around, repeat the same thing on the other end. Don't forget to add your bead first of all on the side that's opposite to where your final wraps are. And then on this end, it's really important that we just make sure before we finish it off that everything is nice and tight, so you can just grab hold of the base wires there and then just start to push everything towards the other end just to make sure it gets nice and tight. We don't have any gaps if we can help it, and that way we already have a much more robust piece. And then on this end, as we finish it off, we just want to make sure that we have everything pushed down nice and tight, because then when we make our bends here in towards each other, that's going to basically lock everything in place. So something a bit like that. Again, the wires are now crossing there in the middle, and then we can just finish these off in the same way, making a wrap loop. And then once we finished off both the ends with our wrap loops here, as you can see, I've then attached my clasp, and on the other end I have an extended chain. All that's left to do is shape this. So what I'm going to do is just use my hands and fingers. I'm going to go in and start putting a curve into it. Obviously make sure that the front of this is facing outward, and then just move gradually from side to side. Don't go into one place and just put a big bend into it. That'll put it out of shape. Rather go from side to side, gradually adding more and more of a curve. So you can see we get the two ends closer together. So we can then actually use the clasp. Now you can also shape it around something that has the size and shape you want it to have, like a bracelet mandrel or anything else you have handy. But then once we have the shape in place, we can then use the clasp and our bracelet is finished and ready to wear. And then we have this really cool negative space woven wirework bracelet with the added bonus of color and sparkle from the beads. And it just gives a really different and unusual effect. Instead of having all the base wires running along with the bracelet, because we take them out, it gives this negative space effect. Now, like usual, you can find these bracelets in my shop. Link will be in the description box down below. And you can also support me by liking, sharing and subscribing, or even using the super thanks button down below. It all helps me continue making these tutorials for you. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.